So I have put over 100 hours into Bless Unleashed in the past 11 days, and I know a lot of you aren't going to like hearing this, but the game is really good, and it does not deserve nearly the amount of hate that it has been getting. The mere mention of Bless will make many of you rush to smash the dislike button as quickly as you can before you even watch the video, and I get that. The original Bless Online in 2018 was a travesty, so of course everybody is right to be skeptical about this. I was skeptical as well. The only reason I even bothered trying this game is because I was sponsored to play it on Xbox a year and a half ago when the console version launched, and I was pretty surprised when I played it. It was way different than the original Bless Online, and it was fun to play. I found myself wanting to play it even after the sponsorship ended. So since then, I've been keeping an eye on the game's updates and waiting for the PC version to launch. To be clear, I'm no longer sponsored by Bless in any way. I'm making this video and I've been following the game just because I genuinely thought that they have a shot of doing well if they continue to improve it from the console version, and they have. Since the console version, combat has been completely updated, performance has been improved, the progression is way more intuitive. The PC version was delayed multiple times until it was ready, and it does feel ready. This has been a pretty good launch. I'm not saying the game is perfect. It does have some major flaws, particularly with the UI and the cash shop. But the problems the game does have are being blown way out of proportion, and I think that's pretty obviously due to the fact that people are coming into the game expecting to hate it because of Bless Online's failure from a few years ago. In reality, despite the cash shop and everything else, you can absolutely have hundreds of hours of fun in this game, even as a completely free-to-play player, and all the stuff that people are complaining about is really not going to detract from your experience that much. The overall game is extremely solid and worth checking out. We're going to go into detail about each of the things that people are complaining about, what the game does right, what it doesn't do right, and you can see the different topics down below in the description along with timestamps in case you want to skip around to different parts of the video and look for something in particular. Let's talk about a part of the game that is very underrated in my opinion, the combat. So for this, we're going to be reviewing a VOD from the stream, so that's why you see the extra stuff on the screen. The complaints I hear about the combat are that it is slow, it's clunky, or there are not enough abilities. And these are the same exact complaints that I heard about the action combat in New World when we were playing that beta a few weeks ago. People seem to not like the fact that when you swing a giant great axe, you're stuck in that animation until it finishes. People also seem to think that combat can't be complex or interesting unless you have 40 different abilities on your hotbar. This surprised me because I figured that by now most people had played Dark Souls or Monster Hunter or a million other games that use basic attacks and animation locking as the core design components that basically all the rest of the combat is revolving around. Of course it doesn't feel good when you swing your weapon and then you're not able to avoid retaliation. Of course you want to be able to cancel that decision before you get punished for it. But instead of calling the game clunky for locking you into that animation, all you have to do is learn when and where you can execute that animation so that you can land a hit without getting whacked. Now, I think there is a legit criticism here when you're chaining several inputs in a row, especially if you are dodge rolling in between them, where the input could be cued better so that it feels a little more smooth. So that is a valid complaint and an area for improvements in this particular game, but the fundamentals of this type of combat overall are very solid. If we use the Dark Souls example, combat is excellent with nothing other than a few basic attacks, a dodge roll, a block, and a parry that you can't even use against most of the bosses. The first time you play a game like that, I think it can feel clunky if you're not used to it. I remember finding the Zweihander in the first level of Dark Souls and hating it because it felt too slow and impossible to use. After I got used to the game, it ended up being one of my favorite weapons. Combat like this is about way more than just spamming abilities in the right order on a global cooldown. There are precise components of spacing and timing that go into your attacks, reacting to your opponent's telegraphs, calculating the risk of each of your actions, as well as managing your stamina. In this game, there's also the added component of basic attack chains. You have left mouse and right mouse basic attacks, but depending on the order you use them, you unlock more and more powerful moves as you chain your basic attacks together. This adds a completely new layer onto the mechanics that we previously mentioned. And then on top of that, the bosses in this game are honestly just very well thought out. Most games that try to do this kind of combat end up with fairly dumb bosses that aren't that interesting after you study them for like 30 seconds. Even Demon Souls, the predecessor to Dark Souls, surprised me when I went back and played it. The bosses are kind of simple and forgettable. They were definitely still catching their stride. The old king can be defeated simply by just sprinting away and baiting his dash attack, which is easily punishable over and over again, and you can solve the entire fight that way. It's not easy to design a fight like this. Something as simple as the timing of the boss's attacks walks a fine line between being too slow, which makes the fight too easy, not challenging, trivial, or his attacks being too fast, which makes the fight nearly impossible because you can never find a proper opening. This particular boss locks you into an arena, which shrinks to become smaller and smaller as the fight progresses. This means the tactic I'm using to avoid his damage, which is to be as greedy as I can and then simply roll out of the way at the last second when he telegraphs an attack, is going to become less and less effective, and I'm going to have to actually master his telegraphs to another level to be able to not just roll out of the way, but eventually be able to walk out of the way as well. Additionally, he's going to unlock some new moves when he's low on health that are going to further restrict the area of the arena that I can use and demand an even higher level of mastery over his attacks and his telegraphs. So I'm actually going to fail this fight because my lack of certainty in my positioning causes me to panic and roll into a set of spikes, which lowers my health just enough to get punished by a new backhand attack that I hadn't previously seen. And to me, this is just undeniably good and thoughtful game design. You can see examples of this all over the game. It's exactly the type of thoughtful design that is completely missing from similar action combat MMOs like the upcoming Amazon MMO New World, where the solution to every fight is to mash your light attack repeatedly and bring a good healer. Not every fight in the game is a slam dunk. There are some bosses that are annoying, but overall the dungeons that we did were very fun, satisfying, and challenging to run. There's even 2 dungeons in the current rotation that I haven't beaten yet. It seems like the dungeons in this game rotate out every week, and looking ahead in the schedule, it seems like they have about a month of dungeons overall that they can rotate before they're going to have to go back and repeat some old dungeons that we've done before. So hopefully after a month passes, those will feel fresh and interesting to run again, or as the game is out and continues to be developed, hopefully they'll come up with more dungeons that they can add to kind of keep that fresh. But I do like that we'll have something to do every week, at least for a while. Level 30 is where you unlock your class's full potential in this game. The soft cap is 40 and the hard cap is 45, but most console players don't seem to have pushed that far. A lot of the clips that I see from console, people are like 41 to 44, even after the game's been out for over a year. After level 30, levels pretty much just give you a bit of attack and HP, but they don't scale super hard. The difference between a level 35 and a 40 is notable, but it's not huge. The bigger difference is that the level 40 has probably had a lot more chances to get gear, and the gear is going to be the thing that you notice more than the levels. You can start to get viable late game gear as early as the level 28 dungeon. It's hard to do at 28, but if you can do it, you can get A grade gear, which is the second best gear in the game. The best gear is S grade gear. I don't have a single piece of that after all this time. I need to go and beat one of the dungeons that I haven't beaten yet to start getting that. But even people who are farming the hardest dungeon, it takes a while for them to get S gear. You still have to get pretty lucky. So A grade gear is viable for a long time. And if you have a good group and you can start farming it at level 28, then you get rewarded for taking on that challenge. So I like that a lot. I think they've done the progression very well. The overall class balance is very good as well. Priest is very valuable because healing in this game is very limited. You don't regenerate health naturally. You have a potion that you can chug on like a 1-minute cooldown, but other than that, you're relying on the priest or you're relying on like lifesteal mechanics to keep you alive, and it's hard to do. So the priest is very valuable, but you still have to do damage on the priest as well. You can't just fire hose health into people like you do as a healer in other MMOs. The ranged DPS, mage, and ranger, they hit really hard, but they are also squishy, and if they get caught, they die much more easily. Of course, they make up for that by having range and being able to avoid some of the mechanics that melee has to deal with. The Crusader on the Berserker and the Berserker, on the other hand, do have to deal with more mechanics, being melee, but they have much larger health pools. The Crusader in particular feels extremely tanky later in the game. Berserker seems to be capable of extremely high burst, perhaps the best burst in the game. Overall, there's a good balance between the 5 classes, just not very good between the different specs for each class. Your spec or talent tree or whatever you want to call it in this game is called a blessing, and only one or two out of the four possible blessings per class are actually good, it seems. The rest are kind of bad. So I think the meta is a little rigid right now, and they could definitely buff some of the blessings that aren't used as much. But overall, each class is solid, and I will definitely be making multiple alts, which will give me some more replayability as well. Another thing that I really like about this game is just the overall experience of the world. I like the music, I like the visuals, I like the atmosphere. The map is well built, and overall the game just feels very good to spend time in. There's a lot of games where I feel kind of inundated with systems and I don't get very immersed. This game, I feel totally the opposite. This feels like a solid RPG to me, and it's something that I enjoy spending time in. The questing and the leveling are fairly generic. The main story quest is alright. It's worth paying attention to if you want to know what's going on in the game, but you know, it's nothing revolutionary there. There are a bunch of objectives that you will encounter as you're questing and exploring the map that are called region quests. You can see those on the map here. And so as I'm questing through this area, I might stop and see a good piece of gear that drops from one of these region quests, and so I can go over and, you know, kill a few mobs or collect a few resources or whatever the task is in this region, and that'll help me along, get me some extra XP. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do that'll kind of distract you from the main quest if you want. There's always other people in the area doing these. You can share tags with other people in the area, so if there's a bunch of people kind of zerging a quest down, all you have to do is just walk up and help them kill the mobs, and you get credits. Very cooperative. You don't have to like fight for tags or anything like that. The looting is AoE in a small radius, so if you and your friends group up like 10 mobs and AoE them down, you just walk up, loot once, and you grab everything, which is very nice. I like that a lot, and I'm surprised that more games don't do it. Another thing that they've done with these region quests is they scale up to your level, kind of. So they basically made it so that these tasks are worth going back and doing, but they're not going to be worth as much XP as a regional from the highest zone that you currently have access in. However, at the same time, the way they scale the mobs up, it's like they're scaling them to, I don't know, maybe 2/3 of your power. It's hard to describe really, but basically they're scaling them in such a way where they pose a bit of a threat, but they're still much easier compared to the higher level mobs that you might find in a zone that is actually concurrent with your level. So although you get less XP for going back and doing those tasks, they're also relatively easier than the zone that you're currently questing in. So if you want to go back and level up with like one of your low-level friends who just started the game or something, you're actually not wasting your time to do that. You can go back and you can get a good amount of XP, you can get a good amount of skill XP, and you can get some gear that you'll salvage for materials, etc., etc. So it keeps the older contents from the lower level zones relevant. You can also kill bosses in those zones to get faction rep. There's repeatable quests in the area that you can do for faction rep as well, and the faction will give you a variety of different rewards. There's some cool mounts that you can unlock by grinding faction rep. There's also some cool like cosmetics and transmogs, special dyes that you can only get from like a particular city. So there's a bunch of reasons to go back and re-explore older parts of the map, whether it's by yourself or with your friends, and it kind of keeps different areas of the game relevant throughout. Another little tidbit that I really like about exploring in this game is that you will find these random treasure chests. We think there's about 300 of these hidden throughout the game, and every 4 chests that you find, you can expand your inventory by 1 slot. You also get a little bit of gold and resources from finding these. These are hand-placed chests, they're not random, so it does give you a reason to kind of explore the different like nooks and crannies of the game, maybe look behind a building or at the bottom of a river or the top of a hill or somewhere where you might not normally go, and rewards you for kind of checking out those areas. People can share a food buff at these bonfires here, which then has 20 uses, so just anyone who's in the open world who's nearby can come over and share the food that you've put in there and get a buff. Right now we're going to head over and fight one of the weekly bosses. So the game has daily bosses that you can tackle, usually with a small group or sometimes even solo. And then there's also weekly bosses. And what I mean by daily and weekly is that's how often you get a bonus reward. You could kill them more often than that if you want, if you're farming them for like crafting materials or something like that. But there's a bonus reward that you get for killing certain bosses every day if you want to. And then there's the bigger gold quality bosses. You get a bonus for killing these once a week. And now there are also open world invasions that will trigger. Usually the invasions or the crusades are on like an 8-hour cooldown. and they all have different mechanisms for triggering them. This one is triggered by the death of the weekly boss, so as soon as this guy dies, there's going to be an invasion where this Chaos God thing comes out of the sky and starts summoning monsters, and everyone goes and kills them. For the most part, the world bosses and the invasions are excellent. However, there are some issues. First of all, some of the world bosses can be reset, which is just completely tedious, especially if you're fighting. There's a higher tier of the weekly bosses called void bosses that have a rare chance to spawn. And if you're fighting like the Harpy boss and it's the void version, it takes a long time to kill her. It's a really tough fight, even if you have 50 people there. And so what'll happen is people will get low on health and they'll run to the edge of the boss. The boss will follow them outside of their aggro radius and then reset back to full health. And that to me is just mind-blowing. Like, how did they not anticipate that? This is obviously is a problem that they would have been having on console a year and a half ago. So the fact that some of these bosses are still resetting to me is just completely unacceptable. There's nothing worse than spending 20-30 minutes fighting a boss, getting it down to 10%, and then it just fucking resets back to full. Makes you want to uninstall the game. So that's not great. But other than that, the world bosses are pretty fun. In terms of invasions, the invasions were really cool when they were a bit like higher level than the majority of players. Now that we've caught up to a lot of the invasions or over leveled a lot of them, they're way too easy. We're beating some of these invasions in just a matter of minutes. This one here is one of the higher level invasions, and a group of 35s out here, we just completely obliterate it. Even in the second and third phases when harder mobs come out, we're killing the mini bosses in 30 seconds, and it doesn't really pose much of a challenge anymore. So I definitely think that there's some more they could do to make the invasions kind of more challenging and relevant later into the game. They're still worth doing for the rewards. There's some really good crafting materials and enhancing materials that you get from doing these invasions. But in terms of actually like bringing back that feeling of like, this is dangerous and we need to get more people out here to complete this, I think that it's only a couple weeks into the game, and these are already feeling kind of trivial. So I think that they need to do something to buff these and make them more difficult like they were at the beginning. Crafting and gathering is rewarding, but it's pretty simplistic. To gather, you walk up to a tree or a rock or a bush, you press the gather button, you collect some resources. Sometimes you get lucky and you get some rare green or blue materials to go along with the main thing that you're gathering. There's also a fishing minigame. To fish, you pretty much just walk up to most bodies of water in the game, and if you have a fishing rod and a lure, you can start fishing. I haven't done a lot of this, so I'm not very good at it, but there does seem to be a pretty in-depth system here as far as upgrading your fishing gear, maybe finding better lures. There's some kind of weekly fishing leaderboards that, again, I can't say much about, but I guess if you catch like the biggest fish that week, you can get loot boxes or something. I wish I could say more about this, but it definitely seems like something that, those of you who are into fishing and that kind of thing might enjoy doing. There's also regional fishing quests, so it seems like there's a good amount of content if you want to explore that side of the game. To craft, you simply approach one of the 5 different crafting stations in the game, and you refine the raw materials that you've gathered into refined materials, and then you craft stuff. If you have the materials, you click on it and you make it. That's pretty much it. There's no like crafting point system or anything like that. If you have the skill and if you have the materials, then you make the item. I don't think that it can fail or anything like that. However, there is a bit of an RNG component here, especially when you're crafting a higher level gear, because the passive that comes along on the gear, so for example this sword has HP on it, it can have, as you can see here, anywhere between 1400 and 1980 hit points. So if you get a minimum roll here versus the maximum roll, that's a pretty big delta. So there's a little bit of RNG as far as crafting a piece that actually has a good affix. This one here, 18 crit damage versus 35 crit damage, that's almost double. So if you got a bad roll versus a max roll, that's a pretty huge difference there. There's also runes that you get onto your gear, which is something that I can't really spend too much time explaining right now, but there may be a reason for you to have specific color runes on your gear, and these are always random. So there's like yellow, green, purple, red, and a couple others, and you want to match these with your accessories. So if you have a build that requires a lot of red runes and you craft an item and it's got a really good roll, but it's all, like yellow runes or something you don't use, then that might not be good, and so you might have to go and craft some more. So It's mainly gathering enough materials to where you can, get the pieces that you need. You can always sell the pieces that you can't use on the market to recuperate some of your costs. Um, there are also high-end recipes, and that seems to where the real money in crafting is going to come in. If you can get some of these recipe-required S or even A rank items, then I think you could make a lot of money there. There's not a lot of people who have these yet. I think the way you get the recipes is from finding ancient chests out in the world. So those are different from the treasure chests that we mentioned earlier that have fixed locations. The ancient chests are on a random timer, and so if you find them, they can have things like rare mounts or rare workers for your estate, which I'll talk about in a minute, or rare recipes for crafting. I think there's a possibility some of these recipes might drop from dungeons as well, but I personally haven't seen that happen. The game does have a completely free market economy, so there's no price caps or anything on the way that you list stuff on the markets. This is both good and bad for predictable reasons, but overall, the main problem with the market in this game is the console UI that it was ported over with. It's just still way too console-y. There's no search function. It's very hard to find what you want here. You kind of have to memorize like 30 different subcategories of which items belong where. There definitely is a lot of wealth to be had if you're a mercantile type player and you want to just buy and sell things and make money that way. But man, this UI, as someone who does like to spend a lot of time in these games figuring out the market and making money that way, it's almost not worth it with how bad navigating this UI is. I think this is probably one of my top 3 problems with the game right now, is just navigating this market. So I hope we get a massive overhaul to this at some point, but until then, a lot of suffering if you're going to be involving yourself in the free market in this game. You guys heard me mention the estate a second ago. The estate unlocks around level 30 after you've beaten sort of the beginning main part of the main story quest. And this is a part of the game that I feel like it's got a good start, but there's a lot more that they could be doing with it. Basically, you have a certain number of plots on your estate, and as your estate levels up, you gain access to more plots. You start off by building just a mine and an orchard, and you can send workers every 11 hours or so to go and gather more materials. And then you can eventually upgrade these so that they can bring you more materials. It's pretty simple. I feel like there's a lot more that they could be doing here. There's some crafting stations as well, but you have to find particular workers to work them. So I built a smithy, but I haven't been able to find a smithy worker. I'm told that you can find them like out in the world randomly at bonfires, but that just hasn't quite happened yet. Every day you will get some random workers that come to your tavern, and these reset I think once a day or maybe more often. It looks like I have a tailor here, so maybe I'll hire her and try to build a weaver, but I still haven't found a blacksmith. I really want to try just getting a blacksmith NPC in here and having him, make me some gear or something and see how that works. At the moment, I can't say too much about it since my estate is not that leveled up, but I do feel like overall it's a bit lackluster, and there's definitely a lot of potential here that's not quite being seen. There are decorations that you can build around your estate that give you global buffs, but the buffs are awful. It's like, 5% more healing when you're AFK at a bonfire. It's very small stuff that doesn't really have much of an impact on the game. It doesn't really feel worth pursuing at the moment. You can catch animals out in the world and put them in your pen here. And I haven't done this yet either, but some of my friends have done it. And basically, according to them, you gather animals here and then you can like butcher them for meat or leather or whatever. I think there might be a system where you can breed animals together. I'm still unclear on that as well. There's a lot of this that I still need to continue exploring. But speaking of mounts, I think they've actually done a really excellent job here. There's a ton of different ways that you can get these. So the way you get mounts ranges from everything from, the faction quest that we mentioned earlier. There's achievements that will give you mounts. There are guild achievements that can give you mounts. There are some of these that you can find just after, out of rare treasure chests. This one apparently is a PvP reward. And you can kind of just go through here and see. Some of these are from Cash Shop. Out of all mounts in the game, there are currently 5 that are Cash Shop. Everything else you can get just from gameplay. So You can catch some of these out in the wild. You can find some of these from treasure map fragments, which are different from both the ancient chests and the fixed treasure chest that we mentioned previously. Treasure map fragments are regional objectives that drop on that area of the map, and if you collect a certain amount of map pieces, you put them together and you get a chest that's specific to that region, and some of those can have things apparently like turtles that you can ride. So that's another thing to go out and work on. And as you can see, the mount variety here is amazing. There's hippos and elephants and pink ostriches, pretty much everything you could want. This to me is one of the coolest parts of the game right here. Alright, now let's talk about my least favorite part of the game, the cash shop. So right away, if we look at the cash shop, we can see that there are things in here that are going to give you an advantage over someone who hasn't spent money. So if you are against that on principle, then you probably want to skip this game. However, if you are a free-to-play or a low-spend player and you're trying to figure out if you can still be viable, if you can still be competitive and have a good time, yes, you absolutely can. We have a mixture of free-to-play and high spenders in the guilds, and the deciding factor for who the most geared, who the most progressed people are in the guild right now has not been who spent the most money. It's been who's played the game the longest, who's spent the most time, or who's been the most efficient with their time. So you can absolutely be competitive as a free-to-play player, but there are advantages that are here. So if we look at the boosts, these look a lot worse than they are, particularly when you look at like the PvE and the gold boost. The XP and the gold boost here are only for when you're killing mobs. And you don't spend a lot of time just running in circles killing mobs in this game. You spend most of your time doing things like dungeons or quests, like actual objectives that have a start and a finish, and then you get a reward when you finish them. And these boosts aren't going to apply to that. So they're not as big of a deal as they look here. With the skill XP, the skill XP boost is huge early game. When your skills don't cost a lot of points, you can level them up a lot faster. So that's nice. But once you get into late and end game, the cost of skills becomes exponentially higher. And so if somebody has a boost running the entire time and you don't, even if they have 50% more skill XP than you do, that's only going to translate into their skills being like level 23 when your skills are like level 20 or 21. So yeah, there's an advantage there. That'll probably make them hit, 10% harder than you do, relatively speaking. So that's something. But overall, is it going to make it so that you can't beat that person if you encounter them in PvP? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. 10% is enough to sway some encounters, but for the most part, you can overcome them just by playing better. There are a lot of things you can buy in the cash shop that will convert directly into in-game wealth. So, for example, these mounts here, you can spend premium currency on these, and you can list them on the markets. If you bought all the mounts and you bought the battle pass and you completely leveled it up, and pretty much all the things that you can get on the market right now that you can convert from premium currency into in-game currency, if in total it would be worth probably like 3 to 5 million star seeds, which is a good chunk of cash, but ultimately not going to be enough to where you're some sort of like god. It's enough to buy maybe like one piece of best in slot gear, and you're still going to have to go through the trouble of upgrading that, and you're going to have to find a different currency called artifact cores, which you can't buy. That's you're going to have to just go and earn yourself. So there's a lot of kind of like guardrails and bottlenecks put in place to where you can't just pull your credit card out and become super powerful. There are some items in here that are just straight up obnoxious, though. There's a item that you can buy that will turn PvP off for 1 hour. And I'm seeing a lot of negative Steam reviews because of this. It's giving people the perception that like PvP in this game is some huge danger that you're constantly facing, and that the only way to avoid it is going to be to pay money. And that's not really the case. There's lots of easy ways to avoid ganking, which we'll talk about in the next section. In reality, this isn't going to be an item that you have to spend money on, even if you're not someone who's PvPing. You can just change channels or avoid the situation. But the fact that this item is in the cash shop, just kind of, it's like they're going out of their way to piss off as many different people, both PvPers and non-PvPers at the same time. So a pretty absurd item. Some of the stuff, again, like I'm seeing Steam reviews about the Elixir of Haste. People think that you're like buying a permanent increase to your character's attack speed or something. It's just an elixir, you guys. It wears off the same as any other elixir. Haste isn't even a good one to use for most classes. You would use something like attack or crit damage. So yeah, it's not that big of a deal. It's not a permanent boost. There is one thing that is, I think, kind of predatory. you can buy these breaths, which you basically use to upgrade your character's blessing, which we mentioned earlier. It's kind of like your talent tree. And the conversion here is pretty bad. You'd have to spend like $1,000 to get 3 million starseeds worth of value out of this, based on the current market prices. But it is completely unlimited, unlike the mounts and the other stuff in the cash shop. So in theory, you could spend thousands of dollars here and just convert money into in-game currency forever. It's a pretty bad conversion, and I don't really think anyone's going to do it. But if somebody did want to come and just drop, fat stacks of money on the game, this could give them a significant advantage if they wanted to spend like tens of grand. I just don't really see anyone doing it because the conversion is pretty bad, but it's a pretty predatory little section of the game. I really hate how they've designed this, and I think this is also the reason the game is not available in areas like Belgium and the Netherlands, because there's a casino component here too, where you have like a slight chance of getting a better one, and it's just stupid. So overall, Cash Shop is quite a failure. I wish that they would have done a better job localizing it for the West. I understand that a lot of their players are going to be coming from regions like China, where this sort of stuff isn't as looked down upon, but I wish that they would have paid a little more attention to the Western market, excuse me, and remove some of these items. There is also, because the game is more popular in areas like China than it is in the West, there's always the possibility that this is going to get worse over time. So keep that in mind as well. Just because the advantage isn't that big at the moment doesn't mean that in a few months from now, it won't just continue getting worse. So take that for how you will. I'm still having fun. There's a lot of free-to-play people in my guild that are having fun. Maybe that'll change in the future, but for now, it doesn't seem that bad. Alright, so for our PvP discussion, we've got some more clips from the stream. The purple name guys here are the outlaws, so they're the ones who have actually flagged up for PvP to attack. You can only flag up in certain areas after level 30. If you're near a boss like this guy, then PvP shuts off again, so they actually can't attack me over here. But later on, we go back to pick a fight with them, and as you can see here, the good guys outnumber the bad guys, and that's going to be the case most of the time. Gankers really aren't that big of a danger in this game. They're very rare. They take penalties for killing people for no reason. They will lose the ability to group with other players, and eventually they'll also lose the ability to use towns, except for the outlaw town, which is kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So there's not really a reason for people to flag up and kill you. There's no faction, PvP, or anything like that. So I don't think you will run into gankers very often. We've only gotten attacked a couple times, and both times we've gotten attacked, we just kind of ganged up on the gankers and they went away. So it's pretty easy to avoid if you're not into PvP. If you do get overwhelmed by gankers for whatever reason, if you're outnumbered or if you lose the fight, all you have to do is just change to a different channel and you can go back to questing or whatever it was that you were doing. So it is avoidable. You're not going to have to buy the cash shop item to avoid PvP. PvP is continuously disabled in all the previous zones, so if you want to go back and do like the scaled up missions in the zones before level 30, you can still go do that. There's never any risk of PvP happening in those areas as well. So it's just a few specific zones, and it's a few specific areas within those zones where PvP is a possibility. But like I said, even in those areas, it's avoidable if you want to avoid it. In terms of the actual PvP itself, it's pretty enjoyable. There's the open world PvP, there's 3v3 arenas, and there's a 15v15 battleground. I haven't tried the 15v15 yet, so I don't have any footage of that. But you can see us doing one of our early arenas here. We're pretty bad, so don't take this as like what true in-game PvP is going to look like. There's a lot of potato plays happening here. But it's a lot of, action combat, kind of dodging out of the way, trying to catch someone, and trying to keep them still for long enough to do damage. A lot of the damage animations in this game are slower, so it's hard to set them up. Team play is very important. It's very difficult for a single person to lock someone down and burst them. So usually you need one person to kind of stagger or stun the person while another person lands their burst. It requires some coordination, and it's pretty satisfying to pull it off. So there's a lot of outplay potential here. The arena match that we have here, it's a best out of 5. We end up going 2 and 3, and the fights overall are very back and forth. So if you're into PvP, I think there's a lot of fun content here, but if you're just looking for a game like only for PvP, like you're a hardcore PvPer and that's all you want, this probably isn't the game. There's a lot of PvE and grinding and dungeons that you're going to have to do in order to get the gear to be viable here. So it's not really a game strictly for PvPers, I would say, but if you're someone who enjoys a theme park game that's got some PvP tacked onto it, then I think that's more of what they're going for here. So I'm just going to let the rest of these arena matches play out in the background while we go over our final thoughts. So for those of you who just skipped to the end, a bit of a quick summary. The game as a whole is a very good theme park game. The combat takes a little while to get used to, but it ends up being very good. The dungeons, for the most part, are excellent. I would say 95% of them are very good. There's a couple annoying bosses, but I've had an excellent ton of fun going through dungeons with my friends. It's probably been the best part of the game so far. The world feels very good to be in and explore. The progression is very satisfying, very addicting. You want to log into the game every day and work on your next thing. Your objectives are always clear. You've always got something to do. Tons of content to go over. The crafting, gathering, and housing, those parts of the game are kind of plain. They're there and they work, but they're not particularly good. So hopefully we get some updates in the future that kind of flesh that content out to make it a little bit more interesting. The bad parts of the game, the biggest thing I would say is the cash shop. Although it's not as bad as people are making it out to be, you can definitely play the game and enjoy it and be competitive without spending money. But obviously there is a lot of bullshit in the cash shop that people can buy that's going to give them an advantage over someone who doesn't spend money. And generally that's going to leave a bad taste in the Western market. Speaking of the Western market in general, I do kind of get the sense that we are like not the main focus of this game. Most of their player base is coming from China, and we've already sort of felt the effects of that. Last night in particular, there was a fiasco where they gave us compensation for taking the servers down, and they meant to give everyone 50,000 gold, which is not that much, but instead they gave everyone 50,000 artifact cores, which is a ton of upgrade materials, like an absurd amount. And after they did this, they locked the markets, but they did a really poor job of communicating what was going on. We didn't know if there was going to be a rollback. A couple hours went by. They finally took the servers down. Then the servers came back up, and we still had the artifact cores, and the market was still locked, and they took the server down again. The whole thing was just really messy. And then when they finally did, when the dust finally did settle, the people who spent their artifact cores and upgraded their gear got to keep their upgrades, but the people who didn't spend them got them taken away. So just the handling of the whole thing was very unfair. They should have never made the mistake to begin with, but after the mistake was made, they also should have done a much better job of communicating, and they should have done a much better job of handling it and coming up with a solution that was fair for everyone. So overall, like, I don't know, it just kind of feels like we're not the region that they're focusing on or that they care about that much, and that they're kind of just doing the bare minimum to keep us happy compared to other regions. I will say the NA version of the game is very well localized, like the story and everything is translated well, so there's clearly been some effort to make this game work in the West, but the way we've been treated post-launch, it definitely feels like they're focusing on the other regions and not so much on us. So that's a problem that could get worse over time. Another problem with the game is the UI. They've done a lot of work since console, but it's still nowhere near where it needs to be. You can get used to the UI in most places of the game, but there's some places where it's just absolutely impossible to use. The marketplace in particular, it's so frustrating trying to navigate and trying to get things done. It takes forever just to list basic items in the market. It eats up a lot of your time, and it eats up a lot of the fun of the game. So that needs a complete overhaul, and I don't know if we're actually ever going to get one. So overall, does the game have a future? I think it's unclear. I think you could for sure get 100 to 200 hours of enjoyment out of this game in its current states. Is it a game that you're going to play for thousands of hours? Is it a game you're going to play for years and years? Probably not, but I do think it's going to be a game that is worth coming back to when it gets content updates, when there's new dungeons or regions that are added. This is a game that you're going to want to come back to and revisit, beat the new content with your friends, and then you'll probably, go back to playing whatever other games you're playing. So, I don't think this is going to be like a big main game that takes over people's lives for more than a couple months. But if you do want something that's going to be fun for a couple months, this absolutely has enough content to keep you busy. And, the game is doing very well in other regions like China. The upside of that is that it ensures the game is going to continue development and continue getting updates. So even if they kind of ignore NA as a region, we're still going to benefit from the updates that they're pushing out for the benefit of other regions. So, it's mixed. Maybe this is something that we'll be playing in a few months, maybe not. Probably with the release of New World, we'll shift over and focus to that instead. But I do see this as a game we can come back to from time to time and just kind of play on the side. So that's about it. Give me some feedback in the comments about this video. If you think I dragged on for too long, if you like the way the video was laid out, if you think we missed anything or should have covered anything that we didn't cover, then, you know, I would like to start making more of this type of video in the future, so I'm interested in what you guys have to say. For now, that's about it. I'll catch you guys over on the stream, and I'll see you next time.